Welcome to Under the Microscope. I'm your host, Jenny Germano. Thank you for joining me today. A little bit about myself. I got my start in cannabis operations back in 2009 here in Colorado. I've been working in the cannabis industry for a total of 16 years. After working in regulated facilities, I decided to form my company, ICS Consulting Service. I had been consulting nationally for 10 years in the cannabis industry. Please give a warm welcome to my next guest, Alex Herding from Red Wolf Risk. Alex, thank you for joining me today.
Jenny, glad to be here.
I'm so happy to have you as a guest. This is a really exciting episode for me. Why don't you give our listeners a little bit about your background, when you got into the cannabis industry? We've been working together for a very long time. We've known each other for probably over a decade. So I'm really excited for people to learn about what you do and all your amazing experience that you had.
Thanks. Yeah, no, glad to be here. Obviously, we've been friends and colleagues for some time, so this is going to be fun for me as well. So I have a background in educational professional background in science and engineering, a lot of water science, hydrology, soil science, wetland science, occupational safety. I spent a lot of time working with engineers on hazardous places and sites and worked with a lot of things that needed OSHA certification and training. And I came into cannabis at the early days, 2009. They call it the green rush. When the laws started changing in Colorado, I became a licensed caregiver, grew for patients for about 4 or 5 years. And when the retail licenses came on in the state, I got one of the very first cultivation licenses. In Leadville, Colorado, I learned the hard way how risky this industry is. The FDIC came into my landlord's bank, threw a huge monkey wrench into the plans. I was able to land on my feet, and I helped a competitor up in Leadville design, build, and operate their facility. At that point, when I was operating cultivation, I realized there was a lack of standards for everything. Specifically, worker safety is what I was initially focused on. And that sent me in a direction of really helping build worker safety programs and training. And that led me into the broader risk world. And then I did quite a few things in the risk space. I became the chief risk management officer for a National Cannabis Risk Association, developed a lot of education there, some assessment software. And that didn't last as long as we all wanted at the organization, but I was able to move on. And I've been focusing largely on risk management, helping businesses lower the risk, lower their insurance policies, working in all areas of property and casualty. So worker comp, property, GL, which I'm sure we'll go into a little bit here, but working in a lot of different areas. But I've done everything in consulting, from licensing, design, build, operations, auditing, compliance, fun stuff like that.
I feel very lucky too, because we've known each other for so long now, and we've had the opportunity to work on several projects together. We're both very system oriented people, so we have had the opportunity to nerd out on a lot of things together. I'm excited to talk about this today. The one thing I feel a lot of people are talking about is why insurance sucks. And to be really blunt about it, it's such a challenging area for new operators and even existing operators, because you're entering into this market. A lot of times they have to have insurance just on their application, just to get it submitted. They have to have proof of insurance, or even just to be awarded their license, they have to show that they have all these different types of insurance. And I think for a lot of people, it's very stressful. It's very uncomfortable to tackle that topic today, navigating the insurance landscape for cannabis operators. You and I, we did discuss the really important things to hammer down on this podcast today for somebody who's trying to learn about insurance or what it means to get insurance for the cannabis operation. How can we share information that will help somebody? The first place I want to start is, if I'm a business owner and I'm plant touching,
Yeah.
we're focusing on plant touching right now because it's really different, plant touching versus not. Where do I start?
Yeah, I mean, insurance, I think most people understand insurance from, hey, I got auto insurance, I have home or renter's insurance. And I think people understand in general, insurance is important because, one catastrophic loss, you don't want it to end you financially. And you really need insurance to protect you in those really worst case scenarios. So I think people understand that at a high level. Okay, I'm going to need insurance because bad things could happen, but they don't really understand the nuance. And to be frank with you, it is really complex. There's a lot of math to it. There's a lot of jargon that people outside insurance don't fully understand. And I think what happens is when you become a business owner in general, it's not even just cannabis, right? If you're just becoming a business owner, what happens is you start with something that and the service or product that you're producing. A lot of times these people are very passionate about what they're doing, but they don't have the larger business sense. And insurance is a critical piece of understanding business. And so what happens is they get into this and they realize, oh, I need to know more about insurance. What are these things mean? And I think again, what we all can recognize is like insurance should work. I mean, it does in a lot of ways. In some ways, it's really hard to understand, but it should be there to protect you when you need it. And what the frustrating part is in cannabis is that it's not always the case. And so it's really important just to understand what the policies are. And we'll get into this, I'm sure, here later on, but there's a lot of things that are called exclusions and safeguard endorsements. These are caveats, right? This is where the devil's in the detail in your policy. And really what it takes is one to read and understand what contract you're signing. And unfortunately, not every agent out there that's selling you these policies fully understand it themselves. And I think that's the hard part is that you're looking for experts to help you navigate through this complexity. And not everybody out there selling these policies are those experts that you need.
Yeah, I think therein lies the challenge, right? Because if I'm not really understanding this fully, and as somebody who has had insurance, just in life in general, having all types of different insurance, it is very confusing
Mm.
to understand. And there's a lot of terminologies or acronyms, and it's a rabbit hole. So hopefully this episode will be helpful, and it doesn't have to be hard and challenging. Our goal is to have people learn from what we're going to share today. Next piece I wanted to dive to is, why is insurance important? Why do I have to have insurance? I understand that I have to have health insurance or auto insurance and certain insurances when it comes to having a business. But why do I have to have all these different types of insurance if I'm a plant touching business?
Yeah, the first one is some states require that. It's some coverage, right? And the most common coverage requirement is GL or general liability. A lot of states will require you to have what they call $1 million of coverage in GL or general liability. This is like if somebody comes into your facility, slips, trips, or falls, or some hazard in their facility hurts them. And this isn't just exclusive to cannabis. Other businesses are required to have that as well. So that is the one that is required in some states to check that box in your application. So that's mandatory if you want to actually operate in those places. Like I was saying before, there's a lot of catastrophic failures that can happen in business that one single business can't afford. And what's really important is actually to understand like where insurance comes from, right? It's actually an interesting story how insurance started, right? Because it gives you context of why insurance is important. And it started back in England, in London, by a group of individuals that call themselves Lloyds of London. Then they're still around and they're not an insurance carrier or coverage. It's not like they're the classic Allstate or Farmers. They're reinsurers, which we can get into later. But what they did when insurance started, the idea was that there was a lot of ships out in sea and they were crossing oceans and they had a lot of things. Ships are expensive themselves. They had a lot of cargo that was expensive. And if a ship sunk, the owner of that ship, they would be done financially for the rest of their lives. They couldn't afford a loss. And so what happened is that these group of men, what they did was they would start sharing the risk. And what would happen is they had all these ships names. And what happened would there were people who would underwrite, and that was where the word underwriting comes from. What they would do is they would sign their name under, they would write their name under the ship's name. And what that meant was, hey, I'm going to gamble on this ship. I'm going to say that I will share in the loss of this ship if it goes down. But the gamble is that you're going to pay me some money, a premium, if the ship comes back. So it's essentially, it's a gambling. And that's what insurance is. It's risk sharing, right? Because that one individual can't hold that entire risk. And so that's the essence of insurance is, okay, one person can't handle the loss, right? So if you translate the cannabis, let's say that equipment breaks down or a light bulb pops and catches on fire and your whole room goes down. A grower can't handle that, right? And most growers, they don't have the deep pockets. This industry is private equity, and there's only a certain amount of money in each and one of these businesses. And of course, they don't have access to all the financial things that other businesses have. So it's even more important to have that coverage if something goes down, because if a fire burns your greenhouse, depending on the size, that can be millions of dollars of losses. And that's just what a business can't handle. The importance here is that it's a collective. It's saying that, hey, joining me in on this risk. And if the bad things don't happen, I'll give you some money. But if it does, help me pay for it. And I need that money.
Another question I have is, all across the United States, are all the requirements different when it comes to insurance? Let's say, for example, if I'm doing a plant touching business in Colorado or New Jersey or New York or Michigan, is each state going to have their own individual requirement? Is there a national requirement?
That's the great question. And actually, so there isn't federal standards on insurance. It's actually by each state, and it's similar to cannabis, right? There are federal groups of insurers that set standards. Hey, this is this type of coverage. Here are the standards within this type of coverage. But each state has their own insurance commissioner, and they're the ones helping set the standards in each state. There's small deviations, but it's essentially each state is managing, looking at how that insurance industry in each state is managed. And what they're trying to do is making sure that the insurers aren't taking advantage of the businesses or individuals that they're giving insurance to. So that's where the governmental control comes from, is at each state. You add the complexity of the cannabis industry run at each state level and the insurance industry run at each level, there are a lot of nuances, and it's usually not at the high level. You have the same coverages, you have product liability, property insurance, you have general liability, worker comp. Those are all essentially the same, but within each one of them, there's different regulations on how they can be applied. So it is the devil's in the details here a lot. There's a lot of details, like I said, on the cannabis regulation side, as well on the insurance. So it's clear as mud for sure.
I actually had no idea that each state had an insurance commissioner. My other question is to talk about the types. There's 7 types of insurance here, is what I counted. And if you could talk about each one and explain how these would relate to the cannabis industry.
I'm going to see if I can count them all off. We have general liability, we have property insurance, we have product liability, we have worker comp, we have directors and officers, we have cyber. I don't know. Some of these businesses might have cars, others might not. It depends, right? It depends what coverage you may need. And some have more importance to other facilities. Product liability, that's a good one. So we'll start there, right? Product liability. Right now, actually, there isn't a tremendous amount of claims in product liability. There are some, and what product liability covers is something harmful that in the product that causes harm to the person when they consume it. We've all heard stories. There's been stuff in the news. There's been a lot of black market products that have led to potential psychosis or some type of contamination. There's mislabeling where, oh, this was supposed to be CBD, but it's THC, that led to panic attack, that led to a heart attack. Like those type of things have liability costs to it, and people can get sued for those. Right now, like I said, isn't as many as I think there's going to be when the industry actually goes federal. When this becomes federally legalized and there's deeper pockets, I think the trial lawyers are going to start coming out and they'll do secret shoppers and they'll find all these potential contaminants out there. It's important to have this because things can go wrong, right? That's deviations in processes, contaminants that came in. Some of your nutrients might have a contaminant in it. Sometimes there's pesticides that are mislabeled that have a contaminant in it, right? You didn't test that particular bottle or whatever of pesticides, and now you have a contamination problem, and then it gets out into the public. There's a lot of things that can go wrong there. The originating facilities have more liability. So the cultivators and the manufacturers, extractors, and fusers, the places where the product was made, have more liability than a dispensary. They'll sell it, the dispensary will sell it, and they can be liable too. There's deli style, there's exposed product in some of these facilities, but their liability is different than the producers. So that's product liability. So property, every business that has a building, which is every business, needs property. It can burn down, it can flood, there can be hurricanes, there can be tornadoes, natural fires, things like that. And of course, fire hazards. So that one, every business needs, but the property risks in a cultivation are different than a dispensary and they're different than a manufacturing. But that one is essential across the board. And so what do we have? Property, product, we have general liability. Like I said, this one is the standard one businesses need because if somebody comes in your facility, slips, there's a whole lot of things and ways people can get injured. This is the classic one where people will slip out in front of a building because the ice wasn't, or the sidewalk area in front of the building wasn't properly cleared, or there was a hazard. A lot of things you can do to control those hazards, but sometimes people just get hurt. So GL is an important one to have. Directors and officers, D&O, they call it. This one's interesting. Getting sued by your employees. Disgruntled employees can sue for a lot of reasons. There's discrimination, sexual harassment, things like that. Usually the bigger businesses, when you get into the C-suite, the CEOs, and you have all the executives, they tend to be more exposed. They tend to have more risks than others. Smaller businesses don't always pick up that coverage, but they're still potentially exposed. And the way you control that is through training and policies and things like that. So it's an important one to have, but not everybody does have those. Worker comp, this is required as well. This is every business has to have worker comp. If you have more than one employee, you fall under the OSHA standards, and every payroll, at least in Colorado, and I can't speak for every state because each state's different, but I would say at least most, if not all states, require when you pay your payroll taxes to pay worker comp. So that one is extremely important. That one, like I said, is usually rolled into payroll. That one's for employees that get injured on site. And that one can be just a quick run to the emergency room or really extended chronic illnesses like repetitive motions or some type of hearing or lung issue that you got on site. That one's really important. Every business must have that one. Cyber is unique. Not everybody has cyber. This is phishing. People get into bank accounts. People hack into your software. Everybody knows, especially over the last 5 years, cyber issues have become more and more serious. And not every business chooses to get this one, but having your employees understand the risks of how people can fool you into giving up important digital assets, and there's real risk there. And then, of course, like you said, auto insurance. I think we all know what that is. So if you have a car, you're going to have that. If you're driving a car during your business, just so you know, too, your personal auto insurance does not cover you if what you're driving for is a business purpose. So it's really important to understand that your typical insurance, your auto insurance, doesn't cover business trips. If you're using your car or automobile during any of your business, you're going to need a separate policy.
So I would connect that to a transporter and probably doing delivery.
Yeah, exactly. If you're transporting your product from one facility to the next, you'll need auto insurance. That's exclusively outlined in your personal auto insurance, and I read through it. You'd see that exclusion. This does not cover business trips. Again, if something is associated with your business and you're transporting because of that, you will not get covered. It's an exclusion.
The next piece I want to dive into is really risk management. I wanted to bring this up because this has become a very overused word lately. I kind of see it everywhere. And there's a lot of risk managers that are out there now, and we're seeing it get sprinkled into the cannabis industry. And I know from my standpoint, for somebody who just does compliance and cannabis operations, I apply risk management, but it's in a different way. This is risk management relating to insurance that I wanted to talk about. So if you could talk a little bit about the 4 ways that someone can manage risk at their plant touching business.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And risk management it is overused word, but I think it's a perspective on the way to look at things in a lot of ways. And everything you do in business, to be frank, is managing risk, right? Every policy, every procedure, all the training, all the documents you have in a business really is to prevent something bad from happening or to mitigate, but it's essentially to avoid or mitigate a loss, everything you're doing in business. So managing risk, yeah, every insurance agent is going to tell you they're a risk manager. And I'm not saying they're not, they are, but they're really only one type of way to manage risk, right? They're only really representing the transfer. So there's 4 ways to manage risk. You can accept the risk, just say it is what it is, and I'm going to accept it. You can avoid the risk and say, nope, we're going to do everything to even avoid that potential from happening. You can mitigate the risk, which means if something bad happens, that you're prepared and you can make it less bad than it would without those mitigating controls. Or you can transfer risk. And this is what insurance is. That's risk transfer. You're saying, I can't handle all of this risk. I've accepted that this is a catastrophic loss that I cannot handle, right? So I'm going to transfer this risk through insurance. That's what it is. So most insurance agents will say risk manager. And again, not disagreeing with it, but really what they're representing is 1/4 of what risk management is. It's a very important one, but in this industry, what's lost are the rest of the 3 of the 4, right? How to avoid risk, how to mitigate risk, and what risk that you just have to accept. Those usually are left out of the conversation in most situations.
Another question I had is, how should insurance work versus how does it actually work?
That's a great question. That's the $1,000,000 question, to be frank with you. Again, insurance works the way that I was kind of speaking of earlier, is that, hey, if something really bad happens, that somebody's sharing in this loss with me. And so I can do what I can as a business owner to pick up the pieces to try to be whole. There's a word that's used in insurance a lot. It's called indemnity. And that means making whole, right? If there's a loss, I'm going to indemnify you and make you whole. But the secret is that you've never made fully whole, right? You have a fire. Yeah, you get the money to rebuild, but there's always losses in there that doesn't make you completely whole. But the way insurance should work is it should get you as close to whole as possible. When you sign that agreement and say, I'm going to pay you a monthly premium if bad things don't happen, but you're going to pay me when something bad does happen, it should pay you in a time of a claim. But what happens a lot that doesn't work is a lot of ignorance, to be frank with you. A lot of people don't understand. And a lot of times it starts with the agent, right? It starts with the agent not explaining to the policyholder, hey, this is your insurance. This is how it works. These are the things to pay attention to. And the things to pay attention to are the exclusions and safeguard endorsements. These are the 2 big things that most people don't take the time to fully understand, again, including the agents and their responsibility to explain it to the policyholder. An exclusion says, hey, we won't cover this type of thing. And some insurance policies are so bad, like the product liability or property insurance, they actually cover inventory sometimes. They do, right? That's supposed to be part of the coverage. Some of these coverages will exclude types of cannabis products, which is, as a business owner, that's what you're selling. So some of their inventory isn't even covered. And there's a lot of things like in property as well. there's exclusions for property damage based on fungi, which means if there's molds that deteriorate your facility, they're not going to pay for it. Guess what? In cultivation, there's a lot of mold issues, right? So if you're not fully aware that, hey, these mold issues that I have aren't going to be covered, you're going to be in trouble when it gets out of control. In the industry, safeguard endorsements, they're excessive. They're part of every industry. They're pretty much part of every policy. But what a safeguard endorsement says is they're rules of engagement. They're saying you have to have these things in place for us to pay you when a claim happens, right? Your fire suppression system must be on at all times, must be maintained, must have current certifications that is up to code, right? So if you're not maintaining that equipment's cut off for some reason and a fire happens, you're not getting paid, right?
Mhm.
There's other safeguard endorsements with security requirements, etc. But a lot of these coverages are just littered with safeguard endorsements. And what that means as an operator, you need to know these are your rules of engagement. You need to bring those safeguard endorsements into your policies and procedures. How do you operate? We need to make sure that this fire suppression system is on at all times and that we have a regular maintenance program that we document. And so that's a lot of the reasons why a lot of these operators get to a point. Now I have a claim. They think they have a claim and then they submit the claim. You weren't following the rules that this thing is excluded, or you don't have the right safeguards in place and we're not going to pay you. So these people paid insurance, they paid these premiums and they think they're going to be covered and they're not. So that's the foundation in this industry of why things go wrong for these business owners when they need the help. But the good news is that you can talk to insurers and you can reach out to them. You can get these explanations. You can educate yourself on what your requirements are. And you can also, it goes both ways. You can educate the insurers, they call it the underwriters who are writing the policies. The gap in this industry is that when insurance doesn't understand, when there's a lack of understanding on the insurer side, what they do is they fill that void with premiums. So they make your policies more expensive. So what bridge needs to be gapped in this industry and what a lot of my professional time is trying to bridge that gap, educating the carrier saying, no, look at all these controls in place. Look at what the businesses are doing. There's a lot of beneficial things they're doing. They're trying their best at mitigating all of these bad things that could potentially happen, avoiding as much as they can. And they need that information to give you better coverage and better pricing.
This is great because I have to go back to safeguard endorsements because
Yeah.
so I've been doing this 16 years. And so in 16 years, I have written a lot of SOPs, policies and procedures. And I've never heard anyone bring up these safeguard endorsements and putting them into my SOPs and that I should have some kind of process in place, how I'm going to do things and how it's connected to my insurance. And I think this is a really important area that I think operators should know because you talked about it like, I make a claim, my insurance company can come back and say, did you have any policy procedures? Did you train your staff on this? People even know about these safeguard endorsements, which I think this is really fascinating. And if I was an operator, this would be something that I would make sure I get into my SOPs. I also find it interesting that the regulatory bodies, in these states, they're not really having this required, like a requirement, right? Because they're not saying, hey, you should have list out what are your safeguard endorsements that could be coming up in your business. And I find it fascinating how not all things are really connecting for all the operators versus like the regulatory structure, what I have to do for insurance. I consider this risk management. And why wouldn't we have risk management as part of the regulatory
Yeah.
structure that these operators are having to follow?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, right? And I think that's what happens is a lot of people conflate compliance and risk management, and it overlaps significantly. There's different types of compliance, right? There's compliance with the state laws, with the federal laws. There's compliance with your insurance safeguard endorsements. There's compliance with your internal business's governance. And that's what this is about, the internal governance of the business. And what that means is the business is responsible for understanding all this. They're responsible for understanding all the rules and regulations, but they're also responsible and accountable for how they run their business and if it's in accordance with the contract they have with their insurance. That's what this is. It's a contract. Most people forget about that. Hey, I'm getting insurance and this is what I need. Most people just want to get past it. And like I was mentioning, most of these business owners, they don't fully understand insurance. They get into it as a passion project and they know how to produce the product. Insurance is just something to get past. Oh, I need it. I'm going to get past it. And they don't put the time and energy to understand that this is an agreement between you and the insurance carrier. And the insurance, and be honest with you, the insurance, they have more obligations. The obligation for the insured is to pay the policy on time. And if they don't want to, then the policy's done. And there's no real penalty outside that, other than you just lose your insurance. The insurer this is a contract that their whole business is based on. So they have the lawyers, they have the understanding of what this is, and you're going to get outmatched, right? If you don't fully understand your contract that you're getting into. So even though this is something that most people, oh my God, my eyes are glazing over and I don't want to know more about this. I just want to get past it. You really do need to know this, and you do need to incorporate your responsibility in this contract, which are the safeguard endorsements and understanding the exclusions, because this is the acceptance part of that risk management. You need to be able to accept the risk that you haven't transferred and that is still potentially there. If you have these exclusions, you've accepted those. That's your risk that you're owning. If you have signed an agreement that has these safeguard endorsements, it is your responsibility to have those safeguards in place, or your insurance is as good as toilet paper, right? Because if you're choosing not to meet your end of the agreement, guess what? They're not either. And as soon as you send them a claim, oh, did you have the safeguard endorsement in place? No. Okay. Our agreement says that we don't have to pay you now. And guess what? They're not going to pay you. It gets ugly at the end if you don't have everything in place when you need it. So what I do with business is I make sure their claims, if and that they're going to get paid. All the safeguard endorsements are in place. Everything's integrated into the policies and procedures, training. It's a lot of equipment, depending on what claim you're dealing with, but information, maintenance, logs, is documentation. It really is about documentation. Understand what your agreement is, what your requirements are, and then document it. And if you do it, then you're going to get paid when you need it.
That was really helpful. And for operators and people that are running these regulated businesses, is that it's so hard. Like, you get insurance. It's so easy just to say, okay, I've got other things I'm working on, trying to launch my business. And okay, I got insurance. Whew, let's just keep on going. And I'm not even going to pay attention to it anymore. It's so easy to bury your head in the sand around it because you have bigger fish to fry in your business. It's really important for people listening, especially new operators or anyone who's trying to get insurance in the cannabis industry for their business, is to really pay attention and to be engaged with your policy. If you don't understand it, then I would demand that to the person that you're working with to really go through and explain everything to you so you can really understand your policy. And are there any things that I actually do need to put in my SOPs? If I lose my crop, or if there's a fire or a flood or any of these things that happen, am I protected or am I not protected because I didn't have it written into my policies and procedures? Those are some really good nuggets, I think, for people to think about. Another thing I wanted to ask is, what are the roles in the insurance industry? Who are all the different participants? If we were doing an organizational chart, let's say, what would that org chart look like? Like, what are all the different people that are involved? How are they working with the operators?
It's a great question. And this is a lot of why it gets confusing, because there's so many different roles. And a lot of times those roles, there's different languages in each one of these roles and how they communicate with each other and how they communicate with the policyholder. It gets confusing. And, but to start off, so you, at the low level, and I guess we'll build our way up, but typically you're sold insurance by an agent. An agent, this is a licensed individual that they have to pass a test in each state or that they're in, and they can work with a broker, which I'll get to, but the agent is, for lack of a better word, largely a salesperson of the insurance, right? They're client facing. And they, be honest with you, they really do have a responsibility to understand the nuances of the industry, how the industry is run, what are the processes, and also how the insurance is run, how insurance is provided, coverage, claims, support. These are all things that agents should know. Unfortunately, not all agents fully understand insurance because it is complicated, right? There's so many ways. Every industry is different and how insurance is made and for each different type of business is different. So it's really hard for an agent to one, understand, hey, their job, how they're working with the insurers. And then it's also on them to understand how the operators are doing their job, which again is a whole nother thing. Now they have to learn a whole nother business. And a lot of agents work with multiple industries. So a lot of times don't know what they don't know. And a lot of times they don't fully understand both the insurance side and the operator side. Some are great. And let me caveat, a lot are very good. The newer ones have a hard time because it's a lot, right? This whole thing we're doing right now is about how complicated insurance is. So just imagine what an agent has to go through. So they're the intermediary between the operator and the insurance, which is, it's again, it's a big job. It's really hard, but a key part of their job is to get in front of the operators and to sell them insurance. Then they work for, a lot of times, what's called a broker. And a broker is essentially a company that is licensed, just like the agent has to get licensed in one state. They get licensed in all the states that they work in, right? So the broker a lot of times will allow that agent to work in other states. So the agent is the client facing, the broker is the insurance facing. Broker works closely with the insurer. The insurer is also known as the carrier, the insurance carrier. This is the company that actually owns the risk. So they're saying they're the ones who are creating the contract, the agreement, the policy, and usually going through the broker to the agent to the policyholder. The people who are making the decisions on the policy are called underwriters. Like back to how the insurance start, they're the ones who are signing under, right? The name saying we will agree to this risk. But what their job is to really understand the risk. And risk ultimately is a mathematical equation. They're using a lot of statistical analysis, numbers. I use the word lovingly. They're the nerds or the geek in the office doing the number crunching. But again, in all these other industries, they have decades, if not hundreds of years of like data to understand risk. In cannabis, they don't have that. So they call that actuarial data. They don't have that data yet. So they're filling in a lot of that ignorance and gaps of understanding with more money that the policyholder has. That's the insurance carriers and underwriters. Of course, the insurance carriers, they have marketing and they have a whole team of other individuals that work for their company, but the underwriters are really doing the hard work. And then above them are what's called reinsurers. And now reinsurers, they're the real bosses here, right? They give out what's called paper to the carrier. And that paper is actually the best way to understand a reinsurer is their insurance for insurance. They're basically buying up policies so the carriers can sell more policies. The reinsurers are the ones buying up the risk. They're basically saying, we accept the risk that you're doling out and we will take some of that on. But the reinsurers, they're the old money. They're the ones who really know how this game is played better than all the other players below them. And like I said, they're groups like Lloyd's of London. They're the most classic reinsurers out there. And they also do like really weird risks, like the artists that insure their voices, right? Or art with their hands, or that you can't just go get a typical policy for. You would have to go outside the normal insurance world and go to a reinsurer to find odd policies like that need coverage.
I think that's really helpful because I don't think people realize all the different roles and how they work together or how they play out when it comes to getting insured. My last question I wanted to cover is, what are some of the biggest losses and claims that you have seen in the cannabis industry?
Yeah, it's a great question. The product liability, there's a few ones out there. A lot of those lawsuits are not necessarily going all the way to court. They're getting settled outside court, which the visibility of some of those, it's not as clear, like how big some of those are, but they are happening. The biggest losses, to be frank with you, are a lot of theft. A lot of people are breaking into facilities, ramming their cars into inventory rooms and stealing, classic kind of theft stuff. There's also a lot of property losses with fires. Cultivations are actually dealing with like light bulbs popping. A lot of these high pressure sodiums bulbs or will pop and then will catch on fire like a tray below it and then catch the whole room on fire. There's also losses like heating and cooling systems going down and frying their entire crop. In those cases, safeguard endorsements, right? Sometimes they'll require, hey, you need this type of process or control on your cooling system. They don't always have that. And a lot of that what was covered under what's called mechanical breakdown. So when something goes down mechanically, then that shuts down your business. That triggers another coverage called business interruption, right? So business interruption will pay you money while you are rebuilding or getting your facility back in order. If you have a loss in the grow room and you need to kill all plants because of the smoke, and then you need to bring in new equipment, they'll pay that turnaround time. Business interruptions are really important. And a lot of businesses don't have that coverage, by the way. And a lot of businesses don't forego the mechanical breakdown. My biggest advice is if you don't have mechanical breakdown and you're a cultivator or a manufacturer, go get it. It is really important because you're basically gambling your whole business on your equipment working. And if one piece of equipment goes down, you're out of luck. That's happening a lot. Yeah, lighting systems, cooling systems, different types of production equipment will fail. And those really are some of the biggest claims out there.
That's something to think about too. I bet you outside the cannabis industry in the manufacturing world, equipment breaks down all the time. I think that is really important to protect your investment. A lot of times there's a range of operators from small to medium to big, single state operators or multi-state operators. And every operator invests their money in different ways. But if you're going to be manufacturing and grow equipment and lights and you're spending all this money or your investors' money, I think it's really important to think about these things and protecting your investment. I really feel like there's a lot of valuable information that you shared. I know for me personally, I'm not an expert when it comes to insurance, which is why I'm trying to have different people on this podcast to cover the areas that I'm not familiar with. So I feel like I have a better understanding of how insurance works. I appreciate you being my guest today. And if people are interested in reaching out to you,
Yeah. So redwolfrisk.com. I'm here to help simplify the complex issues of insurance, help lower premiums, lower risk, and hopefully make businesses safer, smarter, and more profitable.
if you're not working with Alex through Red Wolf Risk, you could potentially be working with him through my company, ICS Consulting. Visit my website at icsconsultingservice.com. A little information about the podcast. It's at Under the Microscope with Jenny on YouTube. And for those who are listening, you can listen on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple, and iHeartRadio. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, everybody.